Okay, here's my 2011 RMZ 450. I just got this bike and I already started taking it apart. I started taking the suspension apart and just kind of doing some preventative maintenance on it. And then I decided that I wanted to make some videos and do like a build series on this bike. You can kind of see some of the parts I have stored on that bottom shelf right there. And then I already have my suspension taken apart. I went ahead and resprung it. I got some Race Tech springs, and I've already finished the shock, but I still have to finish the forks on it. So I thought I'd take you guys with me and kind of show you how I do the forks. But anyway, let me know how you guys like this and see if you guys want more content. Since I've already cleaned the right fork leg up and it's completely disassembled, I'm going to go ahead and just reassemble this, and then I'll do the left fork leg after. So the first thing I'm going to do to reassemble this is I'm going to get this damper rod assembly all put back together. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to fill it with about 7 ounces of 5-weight fork oil. And then I'm going to bleed the damper rod. And the way you do that is you just lift up from the bottom. You just lift the damper rod up and down real slowly until you don't see any air bubbles. Let's see if I can get a better shot of that. Okay, this is the inside of the damper rod, and as I lift the damper rod up and down, you can see the air bubbles coming out. And I'm just gonna lift this damper rod up and down until there's no air bubbles. And then once there's no air bubbles coming up, it's completely bled. You see those air bubbles coming up? Next thing I do is I take this compression damper right here, and I'm going to install it in the inner chamber. But something that I do first is I take and I put it in some fork oil. And the reason I do that is as soon as you put it in there, you'll see a bunch of bubbles come up. And you don't want to have any bubbles inside of your inner chamber, because that just causes it to cavitate. And then you'll have your suspension will fade over time as you ride, and your fluid won't last as long. Anyway, so I just do that. Kind of just shake it around until all the bubbles come out. Doesn't have to be perfect. And then I'm going to just, I also have the lower dampening rod all the way up. And as I put it in the lower chamber, I mean the inner chamber, as I put it in there, I'm going to pull down on the dampening rod and it should suck it down in. And so I'll just go ahead and put it in there. And this does kind of make a mess, so you want to have a little drip bucket underneath. And then as it goes down, I'm going to pull the lower dampening rod down. And as you see, it's slowly going in. Kind of got to wiggle it a little bit. You got to be careful for these little bleed holes, because if you push this down really hard, it's going to shoot oil out of those. And you definitely don't want that. To get in your eye or anything. So now we're at the point where I can just thread this on. Sometimes it's kind of hard. You got to kind of just get the thread started, because there's tension in there from that spring. Now that I got that in there, I'm going to tighten that up. Now that I got that cap tightened down, I didn't really measure how much fork oil I was putting in the inner chamber. I just did about 7 ounces. That's because whenever you get all this put back together, it's going to purge all the excess oil out of it as you compress this dampening rod. So you see it all pouring out right there. So I'm just cycling this dampening rod really slowly, and it's pouring, it's just flushing the excess oil out of it. Any oil that it doesn't need. Just cycling them a couple times, and you'll know if you bled it properly when you cycle this dampening rod. I'll wipe it down. If you bled it properly and you cycle this dampening rod, you should be able to push it all the way in and let go of it, and it should extend fully. See right there, is fully extended. So that means there's no air bubbles inside the inner chamber. So now that inner chamber is done, we'll go ahead and move on to the outer chamber. Now I'm going to go ahead and assemble the outer chamber, I guess is what you call it. Like I said before, I've already cleaned all these parts. I already cleaned everything out, but I'm going to go ahead and just wipe it down one more time, make sure it's really clean. The cleaner, you want suspension parts to be as clean as you can possibly get them. The cleaner they are, the better they'll operate, and the longer they'll last. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and put the fork seals on. I'm going to use this little seal bullet so that way the edges, these sharp edges where these bushings ride, that way those don't cut the oil seal as it gets installed. If it cuts it, if you don't use this and you put that on and it cuts it, then you're going to have a leaky fork seal as soon as you put it on the bike. This is the wrong size for this. What is this? I think 47 millimeter. I believe this is a 48. Let me double check. Let's see what size it is. Oh no, this is a 47 millimeter. Okay, cool. I thought I didn't have the right size seal bullet, but I do. So I'm just put this seal bullet on, just like that. Make sure there's no sharp edge. And then I'm just going to put a little bit of fork oil inside the dust seal. So I'm going to install the dust seal first. And then the retaining clip goes on next. And the oil seal, the inside of the seal, the side that faces inside of the fork, has this little metal ring. It's a little like a spring retainer on the inside, and the outside it's just smooth. So the smooth part goes down onto the fork leg. And again, with this I'm going to just put a little bit of fork oil on it to lubricate it. Now I'm going to put that down. Then I can take this off, if I can get it off. Now I'm just going to work the bushing into the fork leg. you'll be able to, everything should be able to just to fit in there nice and smooth. Now I'm going to get my fork seal driver. I'm going to use this fork seal driver and just drive this seal down, and you'll be able to hear a sound. The sound will change. It'll be kind of hollow sounding, and then all of a sudden it'll just be real solid sounding. And then once you hear that, you know that that seal is set. There you go. Did you hear that? So that fork seal and all those bushings are now set. Now I'm going to take the fork seal driver off, and then I'm just going to get that clip in there, make sure it's seated. You want to be very careful when you're seating this clip that you don't gouge this lower tube, because any little imperfections in this tube is going to cause a leak in oil. You just want to make sure you always go around the entire retainer ring, make sure it's completely seated in that groove, and then to seat this dust cover, just kind of pop it in there like that. So now that's done. Move on to the final assembly. So now I'm going to put the whole fork back together. So I'm going to get my new spring. Make sure it's clean. I'm going to drop this. It doesn't matter which way it goes. I'm going to drop that in there. I'm going to take the inner cartridge for the dampening rod. Oh yeah, by the way, I was going to mention this. A lot of people forget about this, but this nut, you want it loose, but you don't want it tight against the rod. You just want it hand tight for now. And I'll show you why in a minute. So go ahead and install this. You want to be careful that this is right here is a bushing, Teflon bushing. So I'm going to go ahead and coat that. Tighten that. Now, okay, next what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this on the ground like that. I have a little pad down there so that way it doesn't damage the fork. And then I'll take, you can tell this thing's been damaged slightly. Anyway, I just put the axle in there. That way I have something to press down on it with. So next what we're going to do, I'm going to put this little D-rod down to the dampener rod. And I just kind of spin it until it clicks down into place. There you go. You see it shouldn't sit above that dampening rod. So next I'm going to go ahead and install the center lock. what am I doing? So first I got to do this. Freaking idiot. Hang on. I had to get my other tool. That one wasn't the right size. Anyway, I want to catch that dampener rod. And this is a D shape. And you want it to fit down into that inner D rod correctly. So what I'm doing here, the next step, something that I like to do is I like to take and hold that adjuster in place while I thread this down. It just prevents that rod from getting threaded all the way up on the needle inside the dampening rod. So I'll hold that as I thread this on, and I'm going to thread this just until it stops. So there it stopped. And let me show you this. Let me move the camera, I'll show you this. So be careful with this and fall. So you want this to be loose, threaded all the way down, not tight, but all the way down. So that way, you can see this, there's a gap between here and here. Okay? If you thread this down and there's not a gap, then this needs to come down farther. So what we're going to do now is, now that this is all the way down, I'm going to tighten this onto the nut. You don't need to torque it down very tight. You just want to snug it, kind of like that. Now you can release this and go ahead and reinstall that cap. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do is loosen the cap and then fill it with the proper amount of oil, and then we're done. The last thing I'm going to do is just add the proper amount of fluid into the outer fork chamber, and you use your service manual for this. Something that I do is, for instance, this specific fork calls for 369 milliliters, and when you pour fluid into a container, especially oil, if you measure it exactly, like say if you measured this exactly 370 milliliters, when you pour it in here, there's still going to be some fluid left over, and so it's not going to be exactly 370 milliliters that goes into your fork. So I always add a couple milliliters more. That way I'm getting the proper amount. If you use a graduated cylinder, like a really long cylinder where you can get really fine amounts, that's even better. I don't have that. I just have this ratio right. And I have a little quick mix here, maximum quick mix. And this works better, but it's harder to pour inside the tube. So anyway, what I do is just want to go ahead and tilt the fork leg over and fill it up. You just go ahead and tighten this down, and you can reinstall on the bike. I'm going to do the other fork exactly like I did this. Something else that I recommend that you guys always use the stock suspension fluid setting, like the stock amount that it recommends. And then once you have that, you can always add or take away, you know, 10 millimeters or 10 cc's at a time to really tune your suspension. Obviously that's not where you want to start. You always want to start with getting the right springs in your bike, possibly doing like a gold valve or whatnot. But then once you have it basically set up for your weight and your sag is all set up, you can play with the fluid, the fluid amount of fluid in your fork to, you know, give you different tuning characteristics. Like that's another subject, but anyway, I'm going to tighten this up and throw it back on the bike. Oh, I forgot to have my little bleeder screw. So check this out. I forgot to tell you about this. When I first got this bike, the next day I went and rode it. I just went on a little trail ride. And when I got back to my house, I started disassembling it. Well, this bolt right here, that bolts the subframe on. This is the upper subframe bolt. You have your two subframe bolts on the bottom here, and this is the upper subframe bolt. It actually bolts together like this. No, like this. Anyway, the nut was completely gone. So the nut was gone, and it was hanging out like that. So my leg was the only thing keeping this thing from falling out. So that's a good example of why I always want to go through my bike top to bottom and check all the nuts and bolts on it, because you never know, you know, you can never trust whoever owned it before if they did proper maintenance. So anyway, I'll catch you later.